Hello everyone, this is Evan from BlazikenTCG, and today guys, I have my tier list video for the Paradox Rift expansion. We will be going over all of the decks that I would consider meta, and we're going to be ranking them on this tier list. So real quick, I'm going to go over what the tiers mean. Tier S, these are going to be the best decks in the format, and you should have a game plan against them, or be playing one of these if you are going to a big tournament. Tier 1 is going to be decks that are still going to be very popular, but not going to be as popular or as powerful as Tier S, but you still should expect to hit multiple of these at the tournament. Tier 2, these will be decks that will still be popular, but will have some flaws. Maybe they have consistency issues, or struggle to one or more of the decks in Tier S or Tier 1, but you should still have a game plan against Tier 2. Tier 3, these will be decks that'll be kind of more rogue, but you won't be too surprised to hit one in a tournament. You should probably have a game plan against them, but I would not tech for one of these decks, and then don't play this. The name of that tier sums it up perfectly. So we're going to be going over every deck, starting off with Lawson Giratina, which I think is going to be a Tier 1 deck. It's been performing very well in Japan, but that might just be because Japan really likes Giratina, and it's the most popular deck over there and the best performing deck. So that could translate over to the US, but chances are it's not going to be as popular over in North America. So I think it is still going to be a Tier 1 deck. Lost Box was a matchup that it struggled with in the past, so Lost Box is probably not going to be as popular thanks to Iron Hands and Iron Valiant, so that kind of opens up the door for Giratina to get a bit better, and I also can't imagine it having a horrible matchup to Roaring Moon as well, which is going to be a very popular deck, and even stuff like Iron Valiant you will have a game plan against. So I think that Giratina is going to be Tier 1. It still has good matchups against the old decks as well as the newer ones as well. So I think Giratina will probably start off in Tier 1. It could go up to Tier S if it performs very well, or like it kind of did in the Obsidian Flames format, it could start off very strong and then start to go down in popularity. So for now, we will put it in Tier 1. Next up, we are going to go over Gardevoir, which I think Gardevoir is also going to be a Tier 1 deck. A lot of people think that it is not good because of Iron Hands. However, Iron Hands isn't really going to see play in any deck other than Xianpao and Miraidon, I would say. Some Lugia decks will probably play Iron Hands, but I think that Miraidon and Xianpao are going to be the main decks to play Iron Hands. So those are probably going to be unfavored matchups, but I think you still have good matchups against other decks, such as like Goldingo and even Giratina, I think, are solid matchups. But as we've seen in past formats, Gardevoir never really has the best matchups. It always has kind of 50-50s across the board, and then it makes up for the bad matchups with the player being able to just outplay your opponent in most situations. So I think Gardevoir is still going to be a Tier 1 deck, just because, like I said, you can outplay your opponent in a lot of situations. However, I think you do need to have, try and have an answer to Iron Hands, because Iron Hands will definitely be a popular card to include into various decks. So Iron Hands does hurt Gardevoir a little bit, but I think it is still going to be a Tier 1 deck. It could be argued into Tier 2, but I definitely am optimistic about Gardevoir's future of this format, so I'm going to put it in Tier 1 for now. Next up, we have Turbo Lost Box, which I think is also going to be a Tier 1 deck, or maybe not Turbo Lost Box, but just Lost Box as a whole, I think is going to be a solid deck, because Iron Hands and even Iron Valiant do kind of hurt Lost Box, but Lost Box is a very flexible deck, so you can easily put in a tech card to be able to knock out an Iron Hands or an Iron Valiant. Terrakion is a popular tech card I have seen in some lists, so you can knock out an Iron Hands. So I don't think you'll be able to play the same... I don't think you'll be able to play, like, the exact same 60 when it comes to Lost Box as you could in the Obsidian Flames format and still do well. I think Lost Box will have to adapt a bit to this metagame by playing possibly Terrakion to counter Iron Hands EX, and Avery is another card I'd expect to see in Lost Box lists to make it kind of awkward for your opponents if they are playing Jirachi to try and counter the Sableye. But I think if someone is able to nail down that perfect Lost Box 60, then I think it is still going to be a very powerful deck this format. And I think both just Turbo Lost Box, maybe even Single Prize Lost Box, and Kyogre Lost Box are all going to be very, very powerful decks this format. Next up, we have Single Strike Lugia, which we're going to put in Tier 2. I don't think it's as good as Colorless Lugia, but I think it is still a very solid deck nonetheless. I feel like Iron Hands probably hurts this deck a bit because just about every deck is going to have a Lightning Pokemon to knock out the Lugia V-Star. The first attack on Iron Hands does 160, so they can hit for weakness on the Lugia V-Star with the first attack and one-shot it. So I feel like Iron Hands is going to hurt Single Strike Lugia, and unlike the colorless build, you don't really have room to fit in Earthen Vessels and Lightning Energies, so you can play Iron Hands yourself. But I feel like Lugia Single Strike can be pretty good, but the other issue with it is that its best matchup in the past was Lost Zone decks, and Lost Zone decks are expected to see a decline in popularity, so that might also make Lugia Single Strike a bit worse, because if you're not hitting as many Lost Box decks, then you're not hitting as many very favorable matchups. So I feel like Single Strike Lugia is not the best way to play Lugia. It definitely can still be very, very solid if someone figures out the correct way to play Single Strike Lugia. But I feel like Colorless Lugia is going to be the best Lugia deck to play at the moment. Have a lot of flexibility when it comes to tech cards with this deck. You can fit in Earthen Vessels, Lightning Energies, and Iron Hands EX to improve your matchups against the decks that play lower HP Pokemon, such as Gardevoir and Lost Zone Box. It still is just as solid as it was before Obsidian Flames, because you still have the Snorlaxes and the Mew EX. So I think Colorless Lugia is positioned very well right now and is going to be Tier 1 for now. Then we have Fusion Mew and DTE Mew, and I'm going to put both builds of Mew in Tier 1. I think they are both very, very solid at the moment. I think Fusion Mew is more aggressive and has an answer to Spiritomb. So if you're expecting Spiritomb to be popular, then Fusion Mew is probably the way to go, because you don't just auto-lose to Spiritomb. And then DTE Mew is not as aggressive as Fusion Mew, but has much more disruption available to it with the Judge and Path and whatnot. However, you do struggle against Spiritomb, so if players start teching in Spiritomb to counter Mew VMAX, then you might have to switch back to the Meloetta Fusion Strike build. But I feel like both are very solid at the moment. Lost Box and Gardevoir were some of Mew's worst matchups previously. So now that both of those decks are on the decline, you open up more opportunities to be able to hit stuff like Lugia and Giratina, which are. But as always, Mew's absolute worst matchup is Charizard. So if you can just dodge Charizard, you're probably going to do well. But if you enter a tournament and hit a bunch of Charizards, then you might be dropping early, because Mew has a very, very hard time against Charizard. That matchup's like 30-70. It's really bad for Mew. So it's kind of just if you're able to hit even the Lost Zone decks, if you're able to just not hit those, you will probably do pretty fine. But if you do hit Charizard and Lost Box decks, then you might struggle a bit. Then we have Sablezard, which I think is going to be Tier 3, I would say. Sablezard struggles a lot against Iron Hands, because unlike the Turbo decks or any deck that's playing like Terrakion, you don't really have a way to deal with Iron Hands right off the bat, so Iron Hands can kind of just sweep your entire board before you're able to get down to like Charizard range So I feel like this build definitely does trust Iron Hands, but if you're not hitting the Iron Hands decks, then I think Sablezard actually is an okay deck to play. Just you gotta dodge the decks that are not playing, or the decks that are playing Iron Hands. Then we have Roaring Moon, and Roaring Moon I think is going to be one of the few cards, or one of the few decks that is going to be in. There's no like definite BDIF this format, but I feel like if I had to label a deck BDIF, I would label it Roaring Moon, just because Roaring Moon is very aggressive, very quick to set up and hit. The first attack automatically knocks out your opponent's active Pokemon in exchange for putting 200 damage on your own Roaring Moon, but most of the time that's not going to be too big of a deal if you're knocking bigger V-Star or V-Max Pokemon like Giratina, Mew, or Gardevoir. And then the second attack does 220 for the same amount of energies, so I think is definitely going to be a force to be reckoned with this format. It will likely struggle against Lost Box decks, but if you're hitting multi-prize decks, I think the deck is very, very powerful, but yeah, you just gotta dodge this. And if you can do that, then you're probably going to be winning, but if you hit a lot of Lost Box and even Gardevoir decks, then you're probably going to be doing a lot of losing. Next up, we have Xianpao Baxcalibur with Iron Hands, which I would also put in Tier S. If I had to label a deck BDIF, I would probably pick either Xianpao. I think those are the two best decks this format. Xianpao EX, previously in the Obsidian Flames format, had very good matchups, but struggled against Lost Box was a really bad matchup for Xianpao, and even Gardevoir was kind of unfavored if they get set up really well. But now you're able to put the Iron Hands and Earthen Vessels to search out the Lightning Energies, which completely flip-flops the Lost Box matchup. And then you still have like the Greninja, Crossfitcher, Cologne play that you have open to you. And then you also have good melts, so like I think Lugia is very favored, and then I think even Giratina, Roaring Moon, and Mew are all favored matchups as well. So Xianpao really has no bad matchups this format, except its biggest weakness is going to be itself, because sometimes the deck, when the deck works, it works, but sometimes it bricks really, really hard, and it feels like when there's not much you can really do to control it. So I feel like a lot of the losses be able to control the you won't really be able to control why you lost the game, but if the deck runs hot, it is really, really good. Next up, we have Arvanzard, which I think Arvanzard is also going to be a very powerful deck. I think it is going to be Tier 1. If people start in TM De-Evolution into their decks, then I think Charizard could struggle a bit more, but as of right now, TM De-Evolution is not very popular, so Charizard still has free reign to just do whatever it wants. Still takes an excellent Mew matchup. Gardevoir and Giratina are probably 50-50, if slightly unfavorable, and Lugia is also a very powerful matchup. However, Charizard still does struggle to Xianpao, which is a tough matchup, and Roaring Moon, imagine Charizard kind of struggling against, but if it weren't for those two decks, I probably would put Charizard up in Tier S, but I think Charizard is just taking too bad of a matchup to Xianpao, and even Roaring Moon to put into Tier S. But yeah, I think you have at least 50-50s into everything in Tier 1. Giratina might be slightly unfavorable, but everything from this point past, I think, is a pretty good matchup. Next up, we have Miraidon Iron Hands, which we're going to put in Tier 1. I think Miraidon Iron Hands is a pretty solid deck at the moment. I think that Miraidon's worst matchups were Gardevoir and Lost Box, and I feel like a lot of decks had bad matchups to Guardian and Lost Box before, but Iron Hands is making those matchups a lot better, and Miraidon is no exception to this, because Iron Hands makes Guardian and Lost Box go from like 40-60 to, or maybe even like 55-45. I think the matchups are much more winnable now, thanks to Iron Hands, and even the Tapu Koko EX your opponent's active is very powerful in this deck. So I feel like Miraidon got a lot of new toys to play with this format, and I think Miraidon is going to be one of the most popular and one of the most powerful decks. So we're going to put it in Tier 1. I'm going to put it towards the top of Tier 1 right there. Because I think Miraidon definitely does have the potential a top 5 deck this format. Then we have Arcdura. We're going to put Arcdura... I'll probably put it in Tier 3, to be honest. Well, we'll put it in Tier 2. Arcdura won the Toronto Regionals in the Seniors Division, but I think it gets a bit worse this format because you're taking a bad matchup to Roaring Moon, matchup to Xian Pao. You're taking a bad matchup to Goldango. So I feel like the bad matchups just outweigh the good ones. Like, yeah, if you're able to hit the Lugias and Lost Box decks the whole day, you're going to be doing fine, but wins that. Most of the time, you'll be playing some of the harder matchups like Xian Pao and Roaring Moon. So I think I'm actually going to put it in Tier 3. I don't think Duraludon's that great in this format. Arctina, also similar reasons to Arcdura. I think that it just struggles too much against a lot of the top decks. Like Roaring Moon and Xian Pao will just farm Arc decks all day. So if you can't beat either of the Tier S decks and then also taking bad matchups to multiple of the Tier 1 decks, you're going to be doing well in a tournament. Lost Box, Charizard EX, Tier 3. I think Arvinzard outclasses this deck in just about every way. Then we have Goldango EX. Goldango, I think, will probably settle towards the top of Tier 2. I think that it's hot. It has great matchups into multi-prize decks, but it's going to struggle against single-prize decks like Lost Box. So I feel like it's going to be kind of like Xian Pao, where it's going to be more of a run-hot deck. If you draw well and play well the whole, you'll probably be winning games, but if you're hitting bad matchups and bricking, which the deck sometimes can do, then you're probably going to be more towards the Tier 2 range. So yeah, when the deck works, it is sometimes like BDIF, but it's not going to work all the time, and it does have multiple. We'll put it towards the top of Tier 2. If it gets very popular, you might could bump it up into Tier 1, or bump it down to Tier 3 if it doesn't do well. But lately, it hasn't been doing that well in online tourneys. There's only been like 2 so far in this format, but those 2, Goldango, kind of flopped. We have the Iron Valiant decks. So I guess that this Iron Valiant deck just combines Urshifu and Xatu into the same deck. Both of them, I think, are going to probably top of Tier 2 with Goldango. I think you are going to be farming single prize decks. Like, if you hit Lost Box all day, you're going to be... but some decks, like Mew and even Giratina, I think, are going to be tough matchups. So it's kind of like the Inteleon Urshifu deck, where it's going to have good matchups, but you also have a couple auto losses. So if you can just hit your good matchups, then like you're kind of just playing matchup roulette. Like if you just hit the good matchups, if you hit the bad matchups, you're doing bad. And I think that's kind of where Iron Valiant falls right now in Tier 2. I think the Urshifu build is slightly better than the Xatu build, but they're both probably fine. Xatu is a bit more consistent, but I feel like you need the extra power of Urshifu. And speaking of Urshifu, we're going to go ahead and rank Urshifu Inteleon, which is going to be... I'd probably rank it either towards the bottom of Tier 2 or top of Tier 3. I don't think it's as good this format. I think it gets outclassed by Iron Valiant Urshifu in many ways. And you still have bad matchups to Mew and Lugia. And even Roaring Moon, I think, is going to be a tough matchup. And if they set up really well, even Charizard is a bad matchup. So I feel like this format, Rapid Strike, just has more bad matchups than good ones. But yeah, Rapid Strike's always been that matchup roulette deck, so if you hit your good matchups, then you're probably going to be winning. But for now, I think it's just going to be Tier 2. Goodra, I also think, is going to be Tier 2. I think it loses a lot this set. You have bad... You're taking up to Iron Valiant, Roaring Moon, and Goldango. You're taking a bad matchup into all 3 of the new decks. But I can imagine that the older decks are going to be pretty good matchups still, or I'd imagine the matchups will stay the same. The good matchups will still be good, and the bad ones will still be bad. Iron Hands might cause the deck a few problems, but for now I'm just going to put it in tier 2. Next up we have Regis, which is going to be tier 3. I've seen a lot of hype around Regis, but I've tried it out. It still feels pretty inconsistent. I haven't tested it out this format, and Earthen Vessel probably will make the deck a bit better, but I really just think there's better options. I think if you want a single prize deck, just play like Lost Box or something, but I think Regis is not going to be as really powerful before, but I don't think it's going to be very powerful this format. Snorlax, I actually think Control is actually very underrated right now and is going to be in tier 2. Like, I think Control beats all 3 of the new decks, Goldango, Iron Valiant, and Roaring Moon. No one's really respecting Control. Like, you still have solid matchups into, like, Mew, Gardevoir, Charizard, even Lugia is an okay matchup, but Giratina and Lost Box are still really bad matchups, and even Miraidon's pretty tough if they know how to navigate the matchup correctly. The Mimikyu Penny Loop I don't think is going to be too great this format. I think Snorlax is going to be control deck or the control deck that Sander has been playing, which I guess this kind of represents the control deck that Sander's been playing, like the one he did well with in Barcelona. So if that's the case, we'll put it in tier 2. Actually, probably like middle of tier 3, I'd say. I think Snorlax is just the best control deck all around this format. And then we're getting more into decks. Banette Item Lock, I think, is very powerful, but not popular enough to warrant it being any higher than tier 3. But it will be like at the tippy top of tier 3, because I could definitely see it slipping into tier 2, because the deck is very powerful. It's much more powerful than people give it credit for. I think it's just going to be in tier 3 for now. Arceus Regidrago is going to be our first deck, and don't play this. I don't think the deck's very good right now. Dialga, also, I don't think it's going to be that great. Mewtwo, I don't like Mewtwo EX Xatu. It feels very linear and not even as powerful as some of the decks up here. Zoroark Box will probably be tier 3. You can still tech for just about everything, but Lost Box is still an auto loss. Palkia, Bibarel, tier 3. Xianpao outclass it in just about every way. United Wings, tier 3. Horrific Lost Box matchup. Oh, so this is the deck that Sander's been playing. I didn't even see Yveltal deck. So I'm going to put that in tier 3. And I already explained why it's there. And then Mimikyu Penny Loop I don't think is going to be good at all. Sorry for the confusion, but the recent Sander is going to be tier 3. And then the old Sander control deck from like EYC or whenever it was, the Mimikyu Penny Loop, I think is just going to be don't play this. Cofagrigus is bad. Aegislash is bad. Armarouge, Meowscarada. I think all these decks are just going to be don't play this. I wouldn't play any of these decks, honestly. I think they're all fun decks, but just not going to be very popular. Garchomp will actually put in tier 3. I think Garchomp, if someone comes up with a good enough Garchomp list, I think it could be very good. Cloth is, but we'll just put it in don't play. I don't even know what Cloth does. Serena, I think, is an interesting card and can be in tier 3.